Hello, care leaders. My guest today is Nick Martin, and we're going to talk about what you need to know about building care homes in 2024. For those of you who don't know Nick, he is the Managing Director of Aedifice Partnership, who are a chartered surveyor and property consultancy specialising in the care sector. Nick has owned and run the business for almost 2.5 decades and has been working in the care sector since day one. Him and his team have achieved incredible success with organisations like Oakland Care, Anavo, and Greensleeves. It's no secret that the construction industry, both inside and outside of the care sector, has been hugely impacted by things like COVID, Brexit, and unfortunately, the wars that are currently being fought. The implications of these challenges have been felt in almost every aspect of care sector construction. So today's episode focuses on getting to grips with everything that's going on and also what can be done about addressing some of these challenges. I would hazard a guess that there are few people who understand this landscape better than Nick. So this is an absolute must listen to anyone building or thinking about building care homes. Interesting things that you can expect to learn from this episode include what Nick's predictions are for the coming year relevant to care sector construction, including what he expects to see from a tender increase perspective, the current problems and red tape associated with planning applications, what the most impactful ways that new build care homes can become more sustainable, how to do due diligence on contractors before working with them and why this is so important, and much, much more. My name's Simon Parker, and this is the Care Leaders Network podcast. So without further ado, please welcome Nick Martin. So, Nick, I think it's fair to say that since our last conversation, construction in the care sector hasn't got an awful lot easier.
It's not got easier, no. It's got more predictable, I think the phrase is. It couldn't be less predictable, could it really? So had that perfect storm of Brexit and cost increases and wars and all sorts of stuff that caused this massive hike in costs and stuff we had, in whatever it was, 21, 22, that sort of period, and everybody got frightened. And I think that element has gone away, which is good. Things have stabilised a bit. It's been a more stable period, although actually there's not a lot of activity, or hasn't been, because funding and interest rates have been a big issue. So I think it's now starting to get a little bit more movement in the market. Really, I think the phrase would be seeds of hope. I think at the moment in terms of where we're going with or what. Yeah, seeds of hope. Yeah, absolutely.
You mentioned the fact that interest rates seem to be lowering. Hypothetically, I mean, that technically means that funding may become easier. What are you seeing in relation to the construction market as it relates to new build development and refurbishment at the moment in that respect?
Well, I think it's really on the cusp at the moment, in the sense that there's still a predicted fall in workflow. In 2023, they projected a 2.1% drop in workload or work in the construction industry, and they were projecting a 3.2% drop. And this is the BCIS, which is one of many rates which you kind of take into account. But there's still a prediction of drop off of workflow. And obviously the Bank of England, unhelpfully for most people, didn't change the interest rates last week. So we're still looking at 5.25%. And there is some predictions that it will drop in June, July period. But, with wage inflation, they've now reported today at 6%. There's some risk of that. So there's lots of talk about it being, even if they do adjust it, there's a too little too late, because, there has been some major issues. Things like house building and other sectors like that have really struggled. And they're, they're 17th month in decline, I think, something like that. So yeah, it's been difficult. And but I think it is starting to get there is starting to be more activity in the market. There are now funders willing to fund, which is a positive. So yeah, I think things are looking better, definitely.
So let's talk a little bit more about the current state of play in the construction market. I know you've touched upon a few points there, but I mean, I guess elaborating on those would be helpful. And then also thinking, kind of casting your mind to the future and thinking about the rest of the year. Yeah, what does it look like today, and what do you envisage coming down the track?
So I think, well, so in terms of detail, I think material prices have stabilised and some of them have dropped. So that's a good news for people wanting to procure any type of construction. Really, I think labour costs have become a bit more stable now. Obviously, that's been the biggest pressure in more recent months or years. So that's now stabilised a bit more. There are contractors looking for work now, which is good and bad, but it's good in terms of keeping the tender prices down. There is, well, in terms of projections on tender price increases, they vary quite a lot actually at the moment. But when I did the podcast with you last year, we were looking at a sort of 3-4% tender increase, which was about where it ended up actually. The rates now vary from like 1.6% to around about 3.5% increase, depending on who you believe. But I think the general need to keep the books full and keep work flowing will keep pressure on tender prices. So I think that will help. So yeah, I think we're looking at a more realistic market, both in terms of funding options and in terms of the tender prices themselves. So that's good news, really, for anybody wanting to build things.
With the tender prices, obviously you've talked about a variation from 1 to 3%. Is that at the bottom end you're seeing 1% tenders, 1% increases in tenders, up to 3% increases in tenders, or is that? Sorry, maybe I've misunderstood. Or is that a projection of what you're expecting as we go forwards?
So that's actually not my projections. They're projections by people like Curry and Brown and BCIS and people like that who do a much more broader market assessment. So different people have different views on that, and I think it's partly to do with sectors and to do with material and demand and stuff. Obviously, as you probably drive down the road, notice there's a hell of a lot of people digging up roads at the moment. So that's going to cause some increase in costs because there's clearly plenty of work if you're digging up a road. But then there's a lot of pressure on local authorities and government spending at the moment. So major infrastructure projects are being cut back. So those elements have suffered a bit. Commercially, there's a mixed bag in the commercial market, and the housing market is still pretty bad, really, in terms of scope for new work. There's plenty going on, but it's not the levels that we've seen in the past. And obviously there's a pent up demand for housing, but if people can't afford to move or can't afford a mortgage, then it's not going to help. So yeah, I think so. That's a projected figure for this year, rather than actually what we're finding from our own work, because that varies a lot. I think we can say actually in the care home market that things have stabilised quite a lot. The pricing hasn't increased on the whole over the past 12 months to any significant degree, and that's been good news because we've been able to stabilise projections on costs, and looking at funding and things has been easier when you've been able to say, okay, we've got a stable market. And interestingly enough, the contractors were asking, or some of them were asking, for flexibility in pricing through a contract, because obviously a new build care home can take 18 months to 2 years to build. So contractors were asking for some flexibility. That's no longer the case. We've not had requests for flexibility in tenders, in terms of we're not going to hold the price for 2 years because we don't know where it's going to be. That's not coming through now. So yeah, that's all good news really for the sector.
You mentioned earlier the fact that the residential housing market construction space has been in decline for, I think you said, maybe 17 months. Does that what implications does that have on the care home space? Does it mean that kind of sites and contractors and the people involved in that space are drawn towards sectors that are more stable, like the care home sector, where people are they're almost trying to hedge their bets against the residential market to and trying to maybe even muscle in on the care sector because they see it as being more stable?
I mean, in a word, yes. I mean, it means a number of things really. One is that the sites are more available because and the pricing. Obviously, care home sites, because they're in a residential sector, they tend to be impacted by residential land values, and residential land values have been going up for years, and it's always been the biggest issue of how you find a care home site, which is uh, which is affordable for a care home, particularly in areas where there's high value housing, which has obviously been the areas where people want care homes, because if you're in private funded healthcare, that's exactly where you want a care home. So there's always been a, a bit of a contradiction between the two. So when the demand drops off residential housing land, or there's a need for more flexibility, then care home sector wins in that sense. And so we're certainly seeing sites on residential housing schemes coming up for care. And also, and I think land values, although that's not my sector really, land values seem to have stabilised, and there seem to be more deals available now, and there has been for the past 6-12 months, really more deals available for land for care homes, which again is a good factor really in terms of the care industry. Ultimately, there's a massive pent up demand for care beds. I mean, you look at the Savills report that they produced recently, and as they're talking about a demand over 10 years for 144,000 care beds. And on the basis that we're currently, since 2020, only built 14,500, which gives us, 3,900 per annum. We need to be building, 3-4 times that to meet the demand in care beds. So, there is a demand in the market, as long as it can be funded. And part of the problem is getting land at a reasonable price and getting predictable construction costs, which have been a problem. Now it's more achievable.
I know some of the providers that I know that build. They're a couple of the people I've spoken to have been taking quite a. Their view is that the because more sites are basically coming to market, they're waiting for a drop off in price, to basically try and snap up deals and things. Which I guess if there's a bit of a crowded market, I guess that's something that could happen. Whether it necessarily will happen, obviously, we'll have to wait and see whether that plays out. I know obviously valuations isn't your kind of core area or expertise, but I mean, what are you able to share your perspective on how that might play out?
There's plenty of people waiting for prices to go down, but can you ever remember a price going down for something? I mean, so I think the I think they're yeah. I mean, so they with that aside, I think that, there are people who have asked for silly prices for land which are no longer viable, and that's been a factor in the process. I think they'll get better value. I'm not a great believer in waiting, because I think waiting just puts costs up. We quite often get people coming to us and say, well, can we retender it? Can we get a better value? Et cetera, et cetera. The reality is, as I said, very rarely does it actually go down in price. You can tweak specifications, you can negotiate land prices, all that kind of thing. But in reality, the inflation is still increasing. There's still inflation. There's still demand. So the risk of waiting is that you will end up costing you more, and that's certainly the case for construction. We often do budgets where a client comes back a year in and says, right, that budget, let's get on with that budget, and it's like, well, you bear in mind it's a year old here, so prices don't stay still, they stabilize, but there's a big difference between stabilizing and staying still or going backwards. So I think it helps that obviously there is stuff around.
Yeah, the market's always going to be dynamic, isn't it? It's never going to stay still for too long. You mentioned the fact that lending seems to be freeing up for the construction market, which is obviously that's definitely a good thing. Do you know specifically, are you able to name any of the lenders that you've seen that are taking a positive approach to lending for new build care homes?
Yeah, I mean, the ones that we've had experience. Obviously, this is not a comprehensive or necessarily an accurate list, but I mean, we're working with NatWest at the moment. NatWest seem to be fairly uh, open to development lending without too many strings and issues. Uh, we have clients that use Elevation for funding, for development funding. They seem to be very keen still to fund. And then obviously landlords like Target and Octopus, Octopus particularly are busy in the market. They're still looking at deals. And obviously those have been particularly hit by interest rates because obviously they're based on the return value of rental incomes, and that borrowing versus return over a 30-year period is more fraught than it is building for capital investment for yourself, because you can spread that over time and it's less of an issue. But yeah, I think so. So I think that all those players, and those are the players that we are talking to and working with at the moment. But yeah, there are HSBC is still in the market for funding, I think, and so are many of the other banks.
Yeah, getting an overview on the funders and lenders within the care home sector, I think, is very very helpful. Certainly, you'll be speaking to people who are doing deals and making things happen. So getting those points of reference is really really helpful. Um, Casting our mind kind of a little bit even further into the future, what would you say your predictions are around future pressures going forward in relation to care developments? The things that all people building care homes are going to have to factor into their considerations for the future.
Yeah, so obviously there's lots of good news, but actually there's lots of other things which are issues. Like for example, planning consent. Planning consent is a major problem at the moment. Um, Everything seems to take forever. I mean, we have projects which have taken 2 years in planning, which is crazy. And couple that with the red tape that's been increasing in the planning process, and I think the system, from my perspective, is broken. Really, they've put up planning fees in December by quite a margin. Has that improved the situation? Not as far as I can see. So it's not just a money issue; it's a resources and all sorts of other issues here. But I think the biggest issue is also the sheer amount of additional red tape that's gone into the process. I don't think anybody's really sat back and looked at it from a government perspective, which is a big issue really for the country, because there are billions of pounds of money being wasted because it's not going into the construction which people want to fund and get on with. That's costing jobs, it's costing time and money, which is a completely unnecessary delay. Either it's good enough for planning or it isn't. And they should be held to their fixed timeframes, and so should the consultees. So planning is a big issue, and you need to plan ahead. Um, Joking aside, you need to plan ahead to allow for a longer period than you would expect in planning, really, which is a big issue because you've got to get land deals well in advance of needing to start building. So that's worth considering. The other thing that's the red tape issue is also the issue of building control, because building regulations have got more stringent. There are new and more stringent issues on that, and that takes some time and money to resolve. And also coupled with that is obviously the fact that care homes are becoming environmentally more friendly, I think is probably the phrase to use, in the sense that now we're looking at much more air source heat pump use, ground source, that kind of thing. Gas installations are becoming the past, not the future. So these things are great, and it's good to have a more economically run care home, but it does come at a cost and needs some careful consideration. We're trying to. It's a bit like electric cars. You buy an electric car and then find you can't charge it anywhere. It's a bit like that in the sense that a lot of the technology is actually still coming to fruition. So there's work to be done there. But yeah, those things need to be factored in because, in a few years' time, will people be buying second-hand gas-fired heating systems in care homes? Probably not. They would be looking at something that was more environmentally friendly. So, if in terms of future value, it's worth considering those factors, but it does come at a price. So you need to bear that in mind. I think the other thing that's infected the industry and is doing at the moment is the level of administration in companies going bust, basically. There's lots of subcontractors and main contractors that have gone into administration, and I think we've not seen the end of that. So there's care to be taken in making sure that you select the right contractor and that you've got current data on their performance. There's no absolute hard and fast rule to manage out these things, but it's current data rather than the books, which are up to 12 months or more old, is really needed to understand where they financially are. And it's not about size of the contractor particularly; it's more about their stability. Big contractors fall further than smaller contractors, as we found out in the days of Carillion and people like that. So it's really just doing a bit of due diligence and looking at their current status and talking to people who they're currently building for. So that's obviously a key issue in looking at what to do. Yeah.
Three important points there. I definitely want to talk about the sustainability side of things a little bit more, and I think the general kind of landscape around the contractors is really important. But the planning thing just absolutely blows my mind. For me, I don't know what your view is on this, but it seems like it should be like a really really simple process. I feel like there should be some type of land registry database that has all of the market information on it for like commercial construction, just as much for residential construction. Like all of this technology is, I mean, it's almost like old technology. It's not even anything particularly fancy. It just needs to be built and used properly. It blows my mind speaking to people that are building and buying and all of that type of stuff. And it's just so it should be like a one of these like platforms as a service thing where the information's all there. Yeah, there might be a process to follow, but I don't understand why it shouldn't take any longer than maybe a few weeks. The fact that it's taking months and years is just, yeah, I just can't get your breath on that one, can you?
No, it is crazy. You're absolutely right. It's absolutely crazy. There is technically for a new build care home, you're in a 13-week major project process. So it's meant to be a fixed 13-week period. The local authority suggests some more strongly than others that you do a pre-application process. The pre-application process has no fixed time frame, so often you get into a pre-application process that takes months and months and months. The result comes out, and then the planning officer changes, and you don't actually, the information from the pre-application process is completely useless, and they just ignore it at their end, let alone ours. So that bit's down, and then the fixed time period, it seems to be completely out the window at the moment. There is no reference to that at all, really. And the biggest problem is consultees. So you go to people, English Nature and people like that, all sorts of different consultees. None of them seem to be fixed to a time frame. That technically they have 21 days to respond. They should hold them to that and say, if you haven't responded in 21 days, we're assuming you're okay with this, because otherwise, how long do you wait? But at the moment, that is not the case. It is, there's no real proper teeth to the process, really, and it should be fixed. It should be fixed to a time period, and if people should be made to respond, or if they don't respond, that's deemed consent.
Yeah, it's what's the point in having SLAs if nobody sticks to them, right? It's I mean, I guess it's there's no point dwelling on that too much because it doesn't look like they're going to fix it anytime soon. But it's definitely a bugbear for people.
Very annoying.
Onto something a little bit more exciting. The sustainability side of things is. I obviously you and me are going to be getting together to do a workshop on this at in the next few weeks. So I'm really excited about that. What from a sustainability perspective, what are the technologies and innovations and things that you're most excited about that I'm sure we'll end up getting into even more detail when we catch up in person in a few weeks' time?
Yeah, so I mean, so there's a number of things. There's physical stuff, and there's the things like AI, which is really interesting. So I think on the patient care side of equipment, I think that we're only really touching the surface of what might be possible. Um, but bearing in mind that actually people also want human contact, so it's no good. It's no good relying on a machine only. So I think that area is an interesting area of care, and we'll see some real changes over the next 2 or 3 years. In terms of the physical building, obviously we're putting in Wi-Fi, Cat 6 systems and stuff like that, which support all of that kind of AI installation anyway. So I think that's generally covered now and is deemed to be a standard Cat 6 installation, and fast Wi-Fi is generally deemed to be the standard fix now. And obviously fiber to premises FTP installations, again standard kit now. So all of that is inbuilt. I think the other elements are obviously energy performance and ventilation. Um, that those are pretty key areas, and those are some of the big changes in building regs, and indeed BREEAM as well, because BREEAM standards now push a long way away from gas, and the new regulation in terms of the change of energy efficiency in terms of your A-rated energy. Those are due to change, I think, in August now. So having gas systems will be penalised quite heavily in energy rating terms. So what does that mean? That means that effectively things like air source heat pumps become the main source of heating, and I think air source are deemed, well, certainly they're the cheapest option at the moment. Whether that's the long-term best solution is another matter. I think sustainability would suggest that ground source heat pumps would probably be a better all-round solution, where you're taking energy and putting energy back into the ground. And I think that's potentially a better solution, but it is very expensive at the moment. Until boring 100-meter bores becomes cheaper, I think most places will end up with air source heat pumps, and obviously the same issues we have with air conditioning systems would apply in air source, because it's pretty much the same kit. I think that those are the key areas, and I think therefore that leads on to other things like underfloor heating becoming more sustainable than radiators, all that kind of stuff. So that changes the way the homes run. And I think care homes with underfloor heating are generally a better solution anyway, because they're solid background heating. But obviously, when you're distributing heating at a lower temperature, you need more sort of more area basically in which to heat the airspace. So that's all good. And then ventilation. Obviously, there's pluses and minuses in ventilation. There's been lots of issues with basements recently, and that's been an issue. So yeah, it's getting air changes, fresh air into care homes. I think there's a push against mechanical services, because people don't want bedrooms like hotel rooms where there's air conditioning draining the whole time. So I think there's a happy medium there in terms of the ventilation systems. But yeah, those systems are becoming more common now.
Yeah, my dad is a massive petrol head, and he used to describe this thing to me called the Formula One effect. So most of the exciting innovations that we have in our cars originate in Formula One, and we need Formula One for people to invest in all of the cool things that we're excited about having in the future. And I see the same within the care sector around the construction space. We need innovators, people who are going to push the boundaries with this type of stuff to make it more widely adopted, and ultimately, hopefully, bring the cost down so that it can be more widely available. So I love talking about all of that type of stuff, because that's the stuff that at the moment it's the pioneers, the innovators, and the game changers really pushing the edges of the envelope. You'd hope that this is the type of thing that will become ubiquitous over time, and that the whole sector becomes more sustainable. Obviously, we're a long way away from that, but there have to be people at the cutting edge doing this work and implementing these new systems and thinking about these new innovations to make sure that that's the case. So thank you for sharing those points. They're well, hopefully that's the future, right?
Yeah, absolutely. I think the future is really interesting in care, both in terms of patient end care and the physical environment they work within. I think there's some interesting changes in that front. I think we've been looking at how nice the bedroom is and how big the bedroom is and all that kind of stuff. But actually, it's changing now. We're looking more into technology and other areas which can make people's life more pleasant, and their needs met more efficiently. And I think those are probably ultimately, do you need an extra square meter to your bedroom, or do you want better patient care? You probably want better patient care in reality. So those sorts of innovations help those environments, and obviously help in terms of energy saving, help the running of the home, so that you can run them more cost effectively, which is the big issue.
It's definitely a big issue. The one thing that I did want to loop back on, obviously, you've talked about the fact that the contractor market is somewhat volatile. We've all heard stories of main contractors and doubtless subcontractors as well going out of business, and the implications of that are massive. I actually know somebody that's had two main contractors go bump on them during their build process, which is just, I mean, so unpleasant for the people involved in the organization, and I can only imagine how much it's ended up costing them, both in time and actual money as well. Not to mention the deep frustrations that are attributed to that. You mentioned about doing due diligence around research around who you're working with and all of those types of things, and I'd recommend anyone part of the care leaders network to leverage the fellow members to be able to speak to people about their experiences, if they're using contractors, whether they'd recommend them, all that type of stuff. And if you're not a member of CLN, go out to your peers, go and speak to people about that type of stuff, because it's the implications of it, of course, can be massive. I don't know all of the specific details, but it's bringing care homes to life it's a monumental job. There's an awful lot that goes into it, and a main contractor getting the right one can really make or break a project. So getting the right one's clearly going to be of ultimate importance. Would you say, obviously, that's kind of one of the key risks, if you like, around development, but would you say that there are any other really major risks that people have to factor into their considerations for the future, and maybe any recommendations around safeguarding against them?
Oh yeah, I mean, obviously that's the big. I mean, the other really important thing is to be really sure about what you want to build. So one of the things we do is we take clients around care homes we've built recently, and identify, try and build up an idea of what they want their care home to look like. The biggest issue in construction has always been, whether it's care homes or anything, is change. That's where money gets spent. So if you can be really clear about what you want from day one, and for people that aren't used to looking at stuff on plan, it's not so easy. But it's really important to be absolutely clear about what you want. Spend time up front assessing the site, looking at the issues on the site, looking at what you want as a care home. So that the specification that you then put out is really clear about the areas that you want to control. And I say that because most new build care homes are built on a design and build basis. So there's an element of the contractor being responsible for delivery and responsible for some of the design, which is good because it brings in, contractors' views on things like the structure of the building, elements that they can control. You as an operator want an environment which is both sustainable in terms of a building that will last, if that's obviously, unless you're going to shift it immediately on somewhere else, but generally speaking, you want the building to last. You want it to be easy to operate, and you want the interior and exterior space that you touch and feel to be as you want it to be. So it's really important that you define those areas and really clear about what it is that you want, so that a contractor can take that and can deliver that. So the number one absolute is to get your specification fully worked out and thought through. So when you go into a design and build process, you're using the benefits of the contractor to bring down the cost of construction by finding ways of providing that in a cost-effective manner, but not compromising on what you get as a product at the end of the day, the operational home. Really, really important. So those are things that you can control, and it's really important to, if you don't know what you want, spend time looking at what others are doing, what's around in the market, and get a handle on what it is that you want as your end result. That's really important.
The old maxim of failing to prepare. So never
Absolutely,
a truer
yeah.
word said in that case, I guess. Good stuff.
Fail to
Well, look,
plan,
Nick,
plan to fail.
your insights are valuable. Exactly right. Nick, your insights are always extremely valuable. I'm sure we'll end up getting together at some point in probably around 12 months' time as well, to cast an eye over what's going on in the care sector development and construction market. So, thank you. I appreciate the insights that you've shared, and I'm for the people coming to the Property and Construction Innovations Workshop in a few weeks. We're looking forward to hosting you and getting into some of this stuff in a little bit more detail. So, Nick, I will. We'll be getting together on the 19th of June for that workshop. So looking forward to seeing you in person.
Thank you.
Absolutely. Pleasure as always. Thank you so much, Nick.